Welcome to Resilience Gone Wild. I am Jessica Morgenthau, and I'm here with my amazing producer, Kai Sorensen.
Hello, everybody.
Hello.
Good to be here.
And we are just having the greatest conversation about this amazing chat that we had with John Lesku. And this, just to bring everybody to this beautiful place that Kai and I are in, was the topic of conversation, the resilience tool that started this whole Resilience Gone Wild thing going.
Really? Sleep?
It was the parrotfish's bubble.
Oh, yeah. This was one of the first episodes we recorded. You're right.
It was. And it was the first thing I learned that I totally got blown away by. So I was volunteering in the Marine Life Center, in Loggerhead. And I was teaching in the aquarium section. And there was this amazing partner in volunteering that was helping me out. And she was telling me about how these parrotfish produce this entire bubble around them to protect them to sleep. And it just blew me away. And it changed my whole mindset. And it became all about the wisdom and the brilliance and the resilience. And then I couldn't stop thinking about it. So this is how we all started.
Yeah. I'm so glad you reminded me that that this was one of your launching points. It was one of the first episodes we recorded, oh my gosh, almost a year ago, which is crazy. Yeah. Season 2 coming up. But I think it took a while because you wanted to find the perfect interview for this.
Exactly.
Episode, and we did find that Dr. John Lesku, and it's funny, his bio at the La Trobe University website is, and I quote, "I'm interested in most things related to sleep."
Yeah.
That's
and he's the sleep expert about animals. Like the knowledge that this guy has developed from research and from learning from others and from just being in such deep connection with nature and with animal species is just kind of crazy. So, he gives us all these fun stories and you can just see how much this means to him. And
yeah,
and
that's
excited to share it.
Yeah. And it's so fun when you meet people like this who are so deeply happy with the work they do.
Like us.
For something. Yeah, like us, for something that could feel so like, I don't know, it's like breathing, right? But if you actually think about it, it can have an effect on your life in a profound way. And as someone who is navigating life with a toddler, sleep is very important, and lack of sleep is gosh, it can be difficult. So
yeah, we take it for granted. And if everybody's listened to the episode that leads up to this around the parrotfish's brilliant sleep tool and has hopefully learned something about building yourself a bubble and creating an environment that doesn't have distractions, it doesn't have predators and doesn't have parasites, so that you can get that quality sleep that you really need to do what you love in life.
Yeah. And I think as I think more about, my sleeping habits, it's the phone's the big one. I would say half the time I'm able to leave my phone in a place that's not reachable. And I must admit, it does feel like I'm moving the Titanic, right? There's some habits you're breaking. And I think I am noticing a more refreshed sleep when I'm not, scrolling with some blue light. And I think for us, I think we're getting, and you'll remember this as a mother. And when your kids get to a certain age, like Miles, he dropped an explicit word in context the other day.
Where did he get that from?
Exactly. So context clues are becoming really important for my wife and I in terms of modeling behavior, right? So be careful on our phones. What is a good sleep schedule? And it's so funny. My wife and I always joke about how I would love for someone just to give me a bath, read me some books, and put me to bed by 7. And then wake up at 7 the next day, right?
To be 2, right? There's some really nice things about being 2 again.
So anyways, there's lots to discuss, and we won't waste any more time. We'll get to that interview. But the people have been listening, Jessica. New reviews are rolling in, and we got to read one. So out there, again, please take time to stop, rate, review. It really helps us in this algorithm chaos to get this message of resilience to people who need to hear it. So we got a 5-star from Sharon Danziger. Did I say that right? Do you know her? All right. If you're interested in nature, the planet, positive psychology, climate change, and resilience, you will love, all caps, this podcast. I'm so impressed by the amount of science and research Jessica includes in each of her podcast episodes and weekly newsletter, folks. Make sure you subscribe to that almost weekly when we have the time. I particularly love how she connects resilience in nature to small actionable steps we can take to build resilience and help the planet. You won't be disappointed. She also has a lovely voice to listen to. I agree, as someone who has edited
many an episode.
My
I know. I have to say, Sharon, thank you so much for leaving the review. Sharon, I'm a huge fan of this fabulous woman I met recently, and she has just, has this this super positive energy about Resilience Gone Wild. And given all of the amazing work that she does, I am honored by.
I love to hear that, and we love the support. And I just heard my toddler get home. So before his footsteps ruin the recording, let's get to the interview.
Let's get to the interview. Have fun. Hey, John, Lesku, I am so unbelievably excited that you're here to share this discussion with me. And I usually start with a yay. So yay, you're here with me. Yay. And just to sort of put it all together, you are in Australia at early in the morning, being quiet to be care for your children's sleep, which is so relevant to this conversation, right? Like protecting our sleep. It's the sleep bubble that we have on Parrotfish, and the alarm has not yet gone off for them, and probably won't because it's school vacation time. And it's the evening for me. It's early morning for you, and I am so joyful that you're here to share this time with me. So we're here because Parrotfish sleep bubble actually started me out on this entire journey because I fell in love with the idea that there was this metaphor around putting a bubble around yourself as a resilience tool for sleeping better. Fast forward like 9 months, and I found like the perfect person to talk to about animal sleep and to just get into this like really joyful conversation and really helpful resilience conversation. So just a bit about John, then I'm going to ask him to introduce himself. Traveled the world studying sleep, America, Canada, Germany, not only Alaska, but the northernmost tip of Alaska, right?
Yeah, that's right.
So to you, John, just tell us a little bit about why and where and what drove this incredible passion for animals and sleep.
Yeah, thanks, Jessica. I'm really happy to be here. So I've been studying sleep in animals with really special emphasis on non-human animals since 2003. And I guess the reason I got into this was I did an undergraduate degree in zoology, the University of Guelph in Canada. And I was kind of disappointed in some ways at the end of that zoology degree that you would take subjects in animal behavior, comparative physiology, evolution, ecology, histology, all sorts of things. And yet at the end of it, you didn't actually talk about how humans spend 1/3 of their lives. And in some animals, sleep is actually the dominant state, and they spend more than 50% of their lives asleep. And yet this wasn't discussed at all in any subject. And so I left university a little disappointed, and then decided I want to understand what sleep is doing and what is the diversity of sleep across the animal kingdom. So then went down to Indiana, to Terre Haute, Indiana, to start my journey on sleep in animals, which then took me to Germany and some field work in exciting places. And now I'm at La Trobe University in Melbourne, Australia.
You haven't picked up the Australian accent yet, have your kids?
Yeah, my kids sound like cartoon characters. Yeah, it's true. But no, my Canadian accent has been really resilient to infiltration by this weird Aussie accent.
I love it. So it's so interesting because we don't pay attention to the third of our life, should be a third of our life, right? That we are just ignoring. I mean, it's literally a third of our lives and more and less in animals. And why do we think that's not important? It's incredible. So just to process that we need to pay more attention to a third of our life and how the non-human or the more than human world spends a third or more of their life.
Yeah, I agree. It's a strange thing. So if you live to be, say 75 years of age, then you'll have spent the equivalent of 25 years of that time in this state of sleep. And yet sleep typically isn't given much thought. If anything, it's sometimes even given derision. Yeah. That if you prioritize your sleep and you say, oh, I want to sleep in, or I stayed up late, I need to sleep in the next day, then you'll be perceived as lazy, as weak. Yeah. You won't be hardworking. So yeah, it's a bit of a pity that society takes this view, and yet sleep is getting an adequate amount of sleep. Not too much, but getting 8 hours a night or 7 to 8 hours a night is considered one of the main pillars of a healthy lifestyle, that there's getting enough exercise, having an appropriate diet, and getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. So if
because so much happens while you're asleep, right? Like you're not intentionally making it happen, but your body and your mind are a superpowered action during the night. Like all kinds of amazing things happen. And I want you to share that about what happens in our bodies as humans and in more than human bodies. And it just occurred to me that like I volunteered at a sea turtle hospital, and no one ever talks about what happens when the lights, when everybody leaves at 5 o'clock or 5:30, and then they come in the next morning at, 6:30. What's happened there? I mean, I know the vet must have a sense, because once in a blue moon, they'll dry dock a turtle because they aren't sure that they'll have enough energy to like pick their head out of the water or something. Otherwise, like it's so important, and I got to make sure I get them talking about it. So anyway,
so sleep is serving lots of different processes. And when we talk about these processes, I must admit the caveat that we really only understand them in a handful of species. So it is a question mark whether we can generalize these to all mammals, all birds, all animals, or if this is specific to a human, a rat, and maybe a pigeon, So with that caveat in mind, because we're always limited by data across lots of diverse species, sleep is doing lots of things, and it's doing them simultaneously. There is not a single function of sleep, but there are many processes. So for instance, one of the main hypotheses for the function of sleep, which is probably insulting to it because it's more of a fact really, is that sleep is rescaling the connections in your brain. So during the day, which I guess is the end of the day for you, your brain will be more interconnected than it was in the morning. And that process of increasing connectedness is shown at the level of individual brain cells or neurons by an
Okay, wait, I need to hear more about this. What does interconnected mean in this conversation?
Yeah.
And how does it change over the course of the day?
Yeah, so your neurons in your brain, they talk to each other with these connections that are synapses, these chemical connections. Hello. And these connections, if you use them more while you're awake, they become stronger just by being used. And this is Captain Marbles, by the way.
Hi, Captain Marbles. He's a big cat.
He is, and he's a feature of my online lectures as well.
He's part of this now.
He is, yeah. And so those synapses, they become stronger. This is a process called synaptic potentiation, if you like jargon, but they just become stronger. And that's a really good process because it is the cellular basis by which you learn information. In order to learn, your brain needs to change. So it's great. It's great. It's how you learn, but it's not sustainable day after day after day. You need a process that checks that increase in the strength of synapses. And one sleep function is to reduce the strength of synapses in your brain so that at the start of the next day, your brain is now refreshed and ready to take in more information. That's not to say that you forget during sleep. It's just to say that if you use connections more while awake, then those connections are going to be relatively stronger the next morning relative to other connections that weren't used that day.
So all that happens at night.
Idea.
So like if
That's
we,
right.
I always, I have this conversation with people all the time. They say, so-and-so has a better memory than somebody else or than they do. And I challenge it. And I say, that's because they tell the same stories over and over again and build those neural networks like over and over again. And it never occurred to me that sleep was part of that had to be clear. That stuff gets cleared out at night that's not really used. And that the stuff that is used over and over again gets built stronger and stronger during sleep. So if I'm not sleeping enough or people aren't sleeping enough, what is the impact?
If you don't sleep enough, so there's a really classic study from the 1990s, and it makes the effects of sleep loss really accessible. So in this study, they took human volunteers and how to start this one, and they kept them awake for 24 hours. And then over those 24 hours, they had them do a hand-eye coordination task on a computer screen. And of course, within the normal 16-hour day that we all experience, performance was very high on this task. You do great during that 16 hours. But of course, if you extend the amount of wakefulness another 8 hours, then performance declines across that time. Super
lighting
relatable,
being the
right?
same. You're not turning the lights off at night. Just
That's right. Yeah,
okay.
That's right. It's just a function of the time that they've spent awake. And then in a separate study, they didn't sleep deprive them, but they gave them alcohol. And so the more intoxicated they became, of course, their performance also declined. And at a certain level, when they reached the legal level for intoxication, which here is 0.08%. I don't know what it is in Florida, but 0.08% blood alcohol concentration resulted in a very low level of performance, unsurprisingly. And if you took
is that where they come up with that number, by the way?
Yeah. No, it's not from this study. It's not from this study.
No, I mean in general. Is it from studies that show the reduced capacity? I hope
Indeed.
so, right?
Okay. Average reduced capacity, across humans. And if you take that, their performance level at the legal level of intoxication, and you look at when did the sleep-deprived group achieve that low level of performance? Well, they did. And they did it when they had been awake for 24 hours. So by extending your waking day by 8 hours, results in your hand-eye coordination to the level of someone legally intoxicated.
Wow, that's just something worth processing, right? Like you do the same damage to your capacity from just not sleeping for one night than you do by being legally drunk and not allowed to drive. Yeah, or use equipment or whatever, right?
And it is true that very rarely in your life, I suppose, will you achieve 24 hours of wakefulness. Maybe on a long-haul international flight, you might do it, or if you have a baby. I could imagine a lot of new parents are not performing their best. However, sleep restriction, that is to say, you're still sleeping, but instead of getting 8 hours a night, you're getting 6 hours a night or 4 hours a night. There are cumulative effects of having restricted sleep over days. So if you get, say, 6 hours of sleep a night for 2 weeks, then at the end of that 2 weeks, you will still be performing as poorly as the drunk people were in that study.
And so the people always say they make up sleep on the weekends or whatever. Can you undo that by oversleeping?
Yeah,
how do you fix it?
You don't actually fully recover by just having one ad libitum sleep. It does take a few days. So sleeping in Saturday morning is not going to undo 2 weeks of restricted sleep if that's what you are getting.
That's what I was getting at.
So the best thing that you can do is really just try to maintain what's called good sleep hygiene, which is getting 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, each night, having a regular bedtime, avoiding caffeine in the evenings, avoiding screens in the evenings, or at least using the night shift feature to have more amber light in the display than blue light, which is more disruptive of some hormones like melatonin that promote sleep. And so having a good sleep hygiene is key to maintaining optimal performance while awake.
Okay, I'm going to put it out there. I sleep like 6 hours a night if I'm lucky in general. You always hear, people who don't need as much sleep, people who need more sleep. What's the truth and reality of all that?
Yeah, so I think that by and large, modern sleep research probably does people a disservice by insisting too heavily on 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, because anxiety causes sleep disturbances, and the proliferation of technology like smartwatches and things like this that track your sleep, and then you wake up in the morning and it says, maybe next time you didn't get enough. I don't think this really does us any favors, because then the next night you're going to be feeling more anxious about getting more sleep, which might interfere with your actual ability to do it. So although on average humans function best at 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night, but if you're able to do well and maintain a good quality of life and you sleep 6 hours a night, I would certainly not say you're doing it wrong. I think that we have to acknowledge that there's differences between people, and if it works for you, then do it. But if you feel tired during the day, well, then you have a problem.
Your body is sending you a message.
Exactly. Just listen to what your body is telling you.
So let me ask you, before we get to animals, because I do want to talk about sleep animals so much. When we think sleep bubble and parrotfish and this amazing capacity they have to protect their sleep, go with that metaphor. What comes to mind when you think about, what we need to protect on our sleep, what we need to keep out? You just talked about blue light versus amber light. And so, the metaphor I went with was, the bubble keeps things out and keeps things in. So what's coming to mind?
Yeah. So my lab works a good amount on the way pollution affects sleep in wildlife. It's not all that we do, but it's one of the main pillars of the lab.
All different types of pollution, like light, sound, environmental?
Yeah, we work on artificial light and noise, different wavelengths. We work on urban noise, traffic noise, and we work on psychoactive pollutants that permeate urban waterways. We can talk about that later if you wish. And so in the cases of...
Are you talking about like medications, psychological medications that end up in the water? Is that what you're saying?
Indeed.
Yeah.
So, we're a well-medicated society, and we have well-medicated urine, and we pee that out, and it's not actually removed effectively from water treatment, and it is dumped as wastewater into urban streams and waterways. There have been global surveys about psychoactive contaminants in waterways across every continent now, including Antarctica near bases. And these suites, dozens and dozens and dozens of different drugs, are detected, admittedly at extremely low concentrations that are not bioactive in people, but are bioactive in life that is inhabiting these waterways. And it affects their sleep as well. But to get back to your question about bubbles, the real problems we face in our sort of technologically driven society is mostly related to chemicals like overindulgence of caffeine and alcohol, the permeation of bedrooms by artificial light. Typically, these come from screens that as you fall asleep, you're watching something on a laptop, on a television, or on a phone. And these are not great ideas. Of course, this is an easy thing to say and to recommend, but it's harder to do that. And I'm guilty of this myself, that you should be turning these things off in the evenings. You should not be consuming caffeine or alcohol close to bedtime. For caffeine, it should be no later than 2 p.m. For alcohol, around dinner time, because these things interfere with your ability to maintain the continuity of sleep.
Okay, so those are the things we need to keep out. And I go to a place of also, and it sort of relates in some ways to the something you said, drugs, all the anxiety and other thoughts that are keeping you up or waking you up, that we need some tools to get out before we go to sleep. I offer things like journaling and ways to fall asleep and whatever. Do you have some thoughts on, given your history of sleep research, and some thoughts on tools that you might use or that you've heard of that to keep this crap out of the bubble for the night?
So speaking personally, my crap manifests as emails on my phone, that I'm a habitual email checker. And so my solution has been to turn off the ability to check and receive emails on my phone. So I can't look at these things, because if it's near bedtime and I get an email, I'm going to read that email. I'm going to think about its consequences. What are the answers? What are the action items that come out of that? And this is going to keep me up now. My mind is going to be spinning on this when it's not helpful for it to be doing that. So that is the one minor thing that I have changed to protect my sleep, is turning off emails.
Yeah. And it sounds like that was the key for you. So it's not really minor. It might be minor for other people, but there's the advice, like find a key thing that is interfering with your sleep. And it can be unique. It could be different from everyone else in your household or whatever, and own it. Do something to say you are not that important. The world will go on. And you need your sleep because you won't be of any value or enough value the next day, right?
That's right. And I would just add another quick thing here. that, the modern world is pretty cruel to night owls, I would say. So, there's two basic so-called chronotypes of people. They're put into two broad categories. The night owls that like to stay up late and sleep in the morning. And there's the morning larks that like to do the opposite. Unfortunately, I'm a night owl and my partner, sadly, is not. And then there's society is really geared towards waking up, 7 o'clock, being ready for school drop-offs or starting work at 9 o'clock. And the poor night owls suffer from this because we're not aligning our lives with our genetics. And this is genetically determined, whether you're a night owl or a morning lark. And society is pretty mean to the night owls. And so if your partner stays up late, and doesn't mean they're a party animal, and if they want to sleep in, doesn't mean they're lazy. It just means that they're adhering to their genetics and their biological clock.
Is there any connection between like nocturnal creatures and daytime creatures in that genetics, or is that just the spectrum of humans?
Yeah, as far as I know, this is a human polymorphism in a particular clock gene. Whether or not animals have the same variances, I assume that they would, but I don't know of studies exploring that.
Interesting. So to that end, let's switch a little bit over to animals. And I did some research on all of the amazing things that are going on in your laboratory and the research that you've done and that others are doing, which spans unbelievably across species and from birds to fish to mammals to insects to really cool to be able to have research and do research on such a massive variety of our non-human world, and to be able to compare those and understand them. And the research, I imagine, is so incredibly interesting and challenging to study the sleep behavior of a bee versus a bear or whatever and it turns out you study Tasmanian devils, which is super cool because I've got some episodes dropping about Tasmanian devils. I did an interview with Dean Reed of Ausiorc last week. So I definitely want to hear about the devils. But anyway, so yeah. Go for it. Tell us a little bit about what comes to mind.
Yeah, so the lab works on a few different main questions, I suppose you'd say. And so one of those questions, probably the broadest one, is how does sleep evolve? How does sleep change from different types of animals? And so to answer this question, we look at the sleeping brain activity of birds and mammals. And within mammals, we also study marsupials. Since I moved to Australia, we also study bony fish. We study cartilaginous fish. We study sharks. And we study invertebrates like flatworms and weird things. And so that's to get an understanding about how did sleep first appear and how has it changed since then. We're also interested, as I mentioned, about different forms of pollution. We find ourselves living in this geological period that's informally called the Anthropocene, a period that's marked by profound environmental change, rapid environmental change, and animals need to get their sleep too, living in the modified landscapes that we have created for them. So we study those various forms of pollution that I talked about on different kinds of animals.
And again, that gets to the same problem that humans have, right? Like we have light pollution, we have sound pollution. Some of it we create ourselves. Some of it is created outside of our control. And that's one of the issues. Like what can we control? What can we not control? There are animals that burrow into, I assume, deep dens to sleep because they're trying to avoid all of that pollution and be in an enclosed bubble.
Yeah.
And I just get this whole LED bulb change, it just blows my mind that people think it's okay because it doesn't cost that much to keep an LED bulb on. So they leave it on all night,
Yeah.
Nature's being destroyed by all this. Their sleep behavior is being destroyed, right?
That's right. And not just their sleep behavior, but, it changes, of course, their brain activity as well. So if you were to, we've brought in different birds into captivity and we've simulated environments that look like street lights, and these lights, they mimic the intensity, the light spectra of street lights that you would find in your own neighborhood. And when you give birds the same lights, it halves the amount of sleep that they get underneath those lights, and they do try to compensate. They do try to nap during the day, which might have its own problems in the wild, but they are sleeping about 50% as much as they otherwise would. And in changing the wavelength of that light towards amber colored lighting, reddish orangey colored lighting, this is a purported savior of sleep and circadian rhythms because it's less disruptive to the secretion of this sleep promoting hormone melatonin, which is why your technology and your phones will shift towards amber light in the evening as an attempt to minimize the disruption of light in the evening on melatonin. And if you give that to some birds, like Australian magpies, amber light, you find that amber light is indeed less disruptive to the sleep of magpies. It's still disruptive, but it's less disruptive. So that's a good thing for Australian magpies.
Okay, so magpies are super smart, right?
Yeah, magpies are phenomenal birds. We've worked with them. It's another thing, a non-sleep related thing that the lab works on. We work on cognition, mostly in Australian magpies. So if you don't know what it is, it looks kind of like a crow. And crows are members of this family, the Corvidae or the corvids, which are really smart birds. Yeah. Well, Australian magpies, they look like corvids, but they're not corvids. They're a different family called chrysetids, and the butcher birds. And they're all over Australia. I'm sure there's some in the backyard right now. And a lovely bird. And we've done a variety of cognitive tests on them and find that some evidence that they might use tools, they might use wooden sticks to pull food towards them, just as corvids will. They seem to be able to understand causal reasoning in the sense that if you tie a piece of string to a food reward, well, they'll pull that string to get the food. But then if you cut a string so that it's no longer functional, pulling one end no longer pulls the food towards them, they will learn to avoid that string. It's
amazing. I actually wrote a post about magpies for April Fool's Day. Do you have April Fool's Day in Australia?
Yeah.
And because they're actually quite clever and funny, like they'll ring somebody's doorbell just to see what the reaction is, and like they're characters. Yeah, so what happens to them, like given that they have an intelligence level, nearing what we think our intelligence level is, or maybe surpassing, what happens to them? I mean, now that you're studying them when it comes to a loss of sleep, that's such a cool thing that you can see their reactions and their
Yeah, so we've looked at the consequences of sleep loss for Australian magpies. And if you keep a magpie awake for, say, 6 hours in the night, and then you get them to perform cognitive tasks the next morning. So these are fairly simple cognitive tasks. So imagine you have two wells in front of you, and one has a purple lid and one has a blue lid. And there's always a food resource under, say, the purple lid. This is called associative learning. You learn to associate that a purple lid always has food underneath. It's like the simplest form of learning that you can imagine. And then once the animal has learned that rule, purple equals food, well, you change that rule and you see how quick is the animal to learn a new rule. So maybe now food is under blue. And this is a measure of behavioral flexibility. How quickly can they switch to adopting the new rule? That's called reversal learning. And then there's things like spatial memory you can test, where the animals have not 2 options, but they have 10 options. And they're all blue lids now. And the bird has to remember under which lid the food actually was under.
What's that game called with the ball and the 3, you move the ball around and you got to find the ball? What's the gambling game? Oh my God.
It would be kind of like that, right? That's the idea behind it. But if we stick to sort of the simpler kinds of learning, just associative learning, the simplest form. If they lose 6 hours of sleep, actually their sleep is not particularly impaired. Their performance on the task is not particularly impaired by that, which is a good thing for magpies, but perhaps it's just simply too simple a task for them to do. Maybe it doesn't matter if I've slept or not, I can still tie my shoes. And maybe this is the equivalent of tying the shoes to the magpies. But if you keep them awake for an entire 12-hour night, well, then things do change. So that's the level of wakefulness experienced by that the equivalent of an intoxicated human, awake for 24 hours. And if you do that to a magpie, well, now, unsurprisingly, they're less likely to interact with the test because they're prioritizing their sleep. But when they do interact with the test, they make more errors. So sleep does have a consequence for their performance, but really only when it is a very long duration. Now, that's occurring over a single night. And remember, I did say that in humans, there is a cumulative effect of restricted sleep. And we've never looked in a bird about how does sleep restriction night after night after night ultimately affect their performance after, say, 2 weeks. But over the course of a single sleepless night, the birds do fare worse, just as a human would.
Yeah, which makes sense, right?
It makes sense.
Actually, I was reading something about yours that even animals that don't have brains, like sea slugs, need sleep. Like, just talk about how does every single non-human creature, including plants, I want to ask you about that, fungi, plants, all of it. Who needs sleep?
I think sea slugs have like a simple brain, like a ganglia, cephalic ganglia, but I'm not too sure. But the simplest answer to your question is that all species that have been studied by sleep scientists have been found to sleep. So of course, this includes mammals, birds, and other vertebrates, but then within invertebrates, which make up the majority of animal life on the planet, sleep has been found in a variety of arthropods like fruit flies, honeybees, locusts, cockroaches, spiders, crayfish. Sleep seems to be common in arthropods and presumably everywhere, although we don't know for sure, of course, because we've only studied 10 different species. And I say we, I don't mean my lab. I mean the field. Sleep is also found within mollusks like garden snails, cephalopods, including octopus and cuttlefish. It's been shown in nematode roundworms. It's been shown in platyhelminth flatworms. And within...
Which are very low on the evolution scale, right? Like that was why you were starting to... You use them as one of your research studies?
Yeah, so flatworms are really simple animals. So they lack a circulatory system. They lack an anus. They have no respiratory system. They rely on simple diffusion for most things. And so really simple animals. They do have a brain and they have a need for sleep, but they don't have much else. And in the case of the simplest animals that have been studied, not by my group, but a group in California, is the cnidarians, a group that includes jellyfish, sea anemones, and coral. And within that group, upside-down jellyfish were the first cnidarian to be shown to have a need for sleep. So as you said, these animals, they don't have a centralized nervous system. They don't have a brain. They do have a diffuse nervous system, this nerve net that spans out into their radially symmetric bodies. There's also been work on hydra, these sessile polyps that grab things out of the water column with their tentacles. They sleep as well. And how do you tell if an animal is sleeping versus one that's, just inactive? Well, there's a very simple behavioral assay that has been used for 100 years to determine this. It's really straightforward. So in most cases, a sleeping animal is going to be, restful. It's going to have a period of inactivity. That's not so surprising. But the other features of sleep are that they have reduced responsiveness. So if I were to tap you while you're awake gently, you're going to respond quickly to that tap. If I give the same intensity of tap while you're asleep, you're probably going to not detect it or require more taps or stronger taps. So you have reduced responsiveness. And in the business, we call this an increased arousal threshold, but it just reflects that you're less aware of the local environment. And the same is true for jellyfish as well. A jellyfish that's inactive at night is going to take greater intensity stimulation to respond. environment. But then once they've responded, if you then test them a second time, well, they respond quickly because you've now woken them up.
Which reminds me of two stories that I want to throw at you. My kids, when they were younger, we used to have an alarm system in our house, and it would go off by mistake, like a false alarm of some sort, which would say intruder or fire or something when there wasn't one, because that stuff happens. And my husband and I would wake up, like literally fall out of bed, and we'd go into the kids' rooms and they'd be fast asleep, right? I spoke. They would wake up in a second. Your body somehow, or your brain is alert to completely different things. And I recently heard a story about a lioness who was sleeping. The safari jeep was watching them, and this lioness had a sense that there was no danger from this type of human. And she would sleep calmly right next to the jeep. But then she heard the bell of a Maasai warrior that is a human that still attacks lions. And she woke up and took off like she'd been shot. How do we manage and be more intentional about protecting ourselves from sleep that shouldn't be disrupted by certain things that we're letting it disrupt us by?
Yeah, so what you're describing is known as sensory gating. So, we're both awake right now, presumably, and the flow of information from our eyes, our ears, our senses of touch and taste, well, we receive these senses from the environment. They're processed at different levels within our brain. Some are superficial levels, but some are higher order processing centers within our brain. And that series of steps results in a behavioral output, and I respond. So during sleep, just in the case of those lions, there's sensory gating. So the external world is still detected at a superficial level, but a behavioral output is truncated. There's not, the signals do not reach these higher order cognitive processing centers.
It's filtering. I mean, it's basically filtering, right? So it's like a mother who hears the baby.
Exactly. Yeah. So the processing information is stemmed early on in the process. It's kind of like if your awake brain is a castle. And during the day, all of the drawbridges are down and information can move into the center of the castle. But during sleep, the drawbridges come up. So information makes it to the wall, but it doesn't get too deep into the castle. And that was the case with the lion. But if you have stimuli that is very, very important, and it would be lethal for you to ignore, or not even lethal, but in the case of humans, if I were to, this is going to sound creepy, apologies, if I were to whisper your name to you while you were sleeping, say, Jessica, Jessica, you're more likely to wake up to that sound of whispering your name relative to me saying Kevin next to you.
Amazing, right?
And so you do have an ability during sleep to distinguish between different sounds and to respond to sounds that your brain deems more important.
Which is why we can sleep in urban locations through all kinds of crazy urban noise. And then people who go take a vacation from an urban center to the country can't sleep because of the crickets and the whatever, right? And vice versa.
Yeah,
so I think it's really important to recognize this whole sensory gating, right? You said that we need to be aware of changes in noise, and how do we get used to a new sound or light or any sense that we want to have a gate for? Is it just takes time?
Yeah, that's right. So your experience matters. So we have a paper that's not published yet, but we're about to submit for review. I'm hesitant to mention it now that I say it, but anyway, I will. And
it's valid either way.
It is. And in this study, we wanted to see how does experience change the disruptiveness of noise played to you at night. And so we took pigeons. This was in collaboration with Sue-Ann Zollinger at Manchester Metropolitan University in the United Kingdom, and took pigeons, chicks, pigeon nestlings, and reared them in a room with urban noise that people might experience at night. And this was the soundscape of the city of Munich in Germany. And those nestlings were then either exposed to urban noise during weeks as they were nestlings, or a quiet room in which all they heard was the ventilation system and the cooing of other pigeons. And so they had very different upbringings. And then as adults, we looked at their sleep in response to urban noise. And if you were reared in a noisy room as a chick, then as an adult, your sleep was not impacted by this urban noise playback. But if you were reared in a quiet, that rural environment that you were talking about, then as an adult, you are bothered much in the same way as our Australian magpies were to urban noise. You have almost a halving of your sleep.
So I guess you just have to get used to it. It takes time.
That's right. So yeah, which is probably a good story actually for urban wildlife, is that these animals persist in this environment just as we do, and they probably can do so because they're used to it. So their brains have gotten habituated to the noise and maintains the continuity of sleep in those environments. I feel
better about that eventually like all this lighting will be able to be ignored. Yeah, we're going with that. And the sounds.
Yeah, I mean, it is a very popular thing to always say pollution is bad for X, Y, and Z. And I'm sure that is true in many cases. But I do feel like that saying that ignores the obvious, which is these animals have been here for 100 years or more, living in these modified environments with us. Yet they are still here. So sure, it might be bad relative to them living in a nice forest somewhere, but the advantages to them living in the city seem to outweigh any costs to disruptive sleep that they might have. So I don't lose any sleep about urban birds losing sleep.
That makes me feel better. Pollution, not so much. Yeah. Okay, so I was just looking on my list of notes because you mentioned you have a new paper coming. You also have a new book coming out.
Yeah.
Right? Somnozoology, I think. Is that what it's called? Somnozoology.
Yeah,
Sleep
that's
across
right.
the animal kingdom. So tell us about your book and tell us some of the stories. Like, do you have some fun stories that, like, how do birds and dolphins, this unihemispheric, I assume that some of this cool stuff that we are going to be blown away by the way some animals sleep. So share a couple of wild things that we'd be surprised at.
Yeah. So this is the first book ever to focus exclusively on sleep in non-human animals. It's all about the amazing things that animals can do. And the hope with the book is that it really challenges us to view our view, which is a very human-centric view about sleep. Obviously, we all have our personal experiences with sleep, but when you look across the animal kingdom, you find that animals have some amazing adaptations to permit sleep in the weird and wildest of locations. And I would just mention that this book is written with Barrett Klein, who's at the University of Wisconsin in La Crosse, and Niels Rattenborg at the Max Planck Institute for Biological Intelligence in Germany, and myself. And so it's somnozoology, sleep across the animal kingdom. Yeah. It's a global, that's right.
Yeah.
And the three of us have worked together for a number of years, and we felt that it was time to combine efforts into writing this book. It's published by Harvard University Press and should come out either at the end of this year or the beginning of next. But so you mentioned marine mammals and some birds and how do they sleep. And so cetaceans, including dolphins, some kinds of seal, manatees, they can all sleep with one half of their brain at a time, a state that's called unihemispheric sleep, half-brained sleep. And so when they do this, obviously half of their brain is asleep, but then also that sleeping hemisphere is neurologically connected to a closed eye, which means that the awake hemisphere is neurologically connected to an open eye. So in sleeping unihemispherically, these half-brained animals can also maintain half-eyed awareness of the local environment and seemingly able to respond to threats. They use that open eye adaptively. Dolphins will use their open eye to look at other dolphins as if they're maintaining cohesion of the pod as they swim. In the case of frigate birds asleep.
Those are the cool ones with the huge red thing hanging
That's
off
right.
there.
Yeah. The males have this throat sac. Yes. And great frigate birds are the only bird that we know of that can sleep in flight. And they sleep while soaring over the open ocean. And as they do so, they can sleep bihemispherically, just as you and I do, for short periods of time. But they can also sleep like a dolphin and can sleep with one half of their brain at a time. And what they're looking at is they're keeping their eye open for other birds that are sleeping in the same thermal as they are, so they don't collide mid-air.
Amazing. What about all the other birds that are taking these huge, long migrations? What are they doing to be able to get?
We actually don't know. There are lots of different birds that engage in multi-night, sometimes multi-week migrations, or in the most extreme case, you have swifts. And swifts, once they leave the nest, they go up in the sky and they will stay there until it's time for them to make a nest and to produce their own chicks. They do not land again outside of the breeding season. And so presumably, a swift is sleeping on the wing, but we actually do not know how and when swifts are sleeping. If you then go beneath the waves, there are some kinds of sharks that don't stop swimming. So great whites, bull sharks, whale sharks,
most
manta
sharks
rays.
don't stop.
These are all so-called ram ventilating species. So they have to maintain forward propulsion. They keep their mouths open. And by swimming forward, they force oxygenated seawater over their gills. And if they stop swimming, they will drown. And so we don't know how sharks such as those are able to sleep while continuously swimming. Have they evolved some kind of unihemispheric sleep like a dolphin? Or how do they do it? We actually don't know the answer to that question either. So there are still mysteries that we have.
Okay, so tell us some other interesting stories. Like, what do you got that just totally cracks you up that you were blown away by?
So in 2023, a group in France led by a gentleman named Paul-Antoine Liberal, he had published a great study looking at sleep in penguins in Antarctica. And he was recording brain activity from these birds using sensors, not unlike the sensors that would record your brain activity in a sleep clinic. And he found that the penguins would have about 11 hours of sleep a night, a good amount of sleep for a penguin, presumably. But the surprising thing is that they were having 10,000 sleep episodes in that 24-hour day. And so how were they achieving 11 hours of sleep? They were doing it by having extremely short sleep bouts, 1 to 4 seconds long. And if you add up all of those 1 to 4 seconds, you then get to 11 hours. And so this is one of these great reveals about the diversity of sleep across the animal kingdom, that we consider sleep fragmentation to be a bad thing. If you have a partner who has sleep apnea, sleep apnea is where you wake up hundreds of times in the night, just for a millisecond to regain control over the tone in your windpipe. You inhale, you go back to sleep. You're probably not even aware of it. And that's a pathology in humans. And so sleep fragmentation is viewed as a bad thing for humans. But if you look in penguins, they don't seem to be bothered at all. In fact, that seems to be what they normally would be doing in nature.
While they're swimming or while they're hanging out in the
they're in the colony. Well, they're hanging out in the colony. Yeah.
On the shore.
On the shore. Yeah. They're on land during this time, and another remarkable thing that some animals can do is we studied the sleep of pectoral sandpipers in Alaska, the north coast of Alaska. So these are a type of shorebird. Outside of the breeding season, they're found in the southern hemisphere. They're found in Australia, New Zealand, and South America. And then they fly, take a multi-month flight, so not continuous. They stop plenty. They take a multi-month flight north from the southern hemisphere to above the Arctic Circle to breed.
Amazing.
And
so like one of the coldest places, which is so weird, right? Just to think about, but that's a separate issue.
Yeah. But it also has attractive things, that it has continuous daylight during this time. And the Arctic in the summer becomes hyper abundant for food, particularly for soft-bodied invertebrates living in above the permafrost in this sort of boggy soil. So it's great for waders. So a lot of birds go to the high Arctic in the summer to breed. And so we followed the birds up. We flew by airplane. We didn't do it the hard way. And when the birds arrive, in the tundra, the males set up territories because the males are competing for access to females. They want to impress females because the females are extremely choosy about which males they're going to mate with, because the female has flown, 13,000 kilometers, something like that.
She's going to make it worth her while.
That's right. That's right. She wants to pick the best male to sire what will be the only clutch of that season. So she really discriminates among the boys. But the boys are less discriminating of the females. They want to mate with as many females as they can because their investment into reproduction is limited really to sperm production, basically, and defending their territories. So the males, they set up these territories. They have to fight other males. They have to display to females. They have to look out for predators, and they have to eat. And we found that some males, not all, some males have a remarkable capacity to sleep very, very little for weeks at a time. And when I say very little, I mean they could be awake 95% of the time for 3 weeks. And so this is a level of sleep restriction, extreme sleep restriction, that a human could not endure for a day or two without compromised performance. And in the case of these sandpipers, the males that are sleeping the least are the ones that are able to convince those scrutinizing females that they're the best male to sire her only clutch of the season. They ultimately produce the most chicks. And so in this environment, sleep loss can be adaptive, which was the first time that had been demonstrated in any animal.
That's amazing. It's the survival of the fittest is the ones who can be sleep deprived the longest in this specific species.
That's
really
right.
Cool. Okay. Last words of wisdom. What do you recommend? How many hours sleep did you get last night, by the way?
Okay. Now, so according to my watch this morning, I got over 10 hours of sleep. Now, but there's an important caveat here is I just returned from Liverpool in the UK.
It's a long flight.
I'm horribly jet lagged after my 40 hours of travel.
Okay, that's fair.
So I slept a lot last night.
But you're making up for it. It's a good thing.
That's right.
That's awesome. And you have to do it tonight too. Awesome. Any last words of wisdom for us? And other than the fact that we need to go out and buy your book and read your articles and learn more about sleep.
That's right. I think that it is fascinating to see the adaptations that other animals have to get their daily amount of sleep, or in the case of the sandpipers, not. There's real value in exploring this, to opening our eyes, in a sense, about what sleep can be across the animal kingdom.
Yeah, so that we can respect them and that we can learn from it ourselves. So, yeah, awesome. Thank you so much, John. So appreciate it. So happy after all this time of waiting for somebody who's just the right person to talk to about parrotfish and their sleep bubble. I so appreciate your being in this conversation, and looking forward to staying in touch and keeping up with your beautiful work.
Cheers. Thank you very much for the opportunity. Thank you.
This has been a production of BLI Studios, produced by me, Kai. Follow along with our other BLI produced shows at balancinglifesissues.com/podcast-BLI. Got an idea for the show? Email me, Kai, at balancinglifesissues.com. And don't forget to stay in touch with your host, Jessica, at jessica@winwinwinmindset.com. Anything else to add, Miles?
Yeah.